one has been more of a booster of authoritarian tech policies over the past few years than this man, Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt is a reactionary right-wing guy who basically got famous for ranting about cancel culture. He wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. He basically has promoted a bunch of right-wing stuff. He is on the board of Barry Weiss's fake university. Um, he's just overall a ridiculous man who wants a bunch of reactionary, terrible laws. Here he is. He's my number one op. He's also extremely anti-trans, extremely anti-LGBTQ. He's promoted a fringe theory about trans people. Basically, what he's promoted is the idea that the internet is, turning people gay. The internet is turning people trans and gay, and we need to ban kids from social media because they might see a gay person and turn trans. That's kind of his vibe. Of course, he has done work with the Heritage Foundation. Surprise, surprise, the Heritage Foundation, always at the scene of the crime. They did an event with him last October called Screens and Sickness, Raising Healthy Kids in a Distracted World. And he's on stage pushing, look at this, Heritage Foundation trying to get my data. No, I do not consent to cookies. Okay. So he is, here talking about all this right-wing nonsense stuff. He's a proponent of the Kids Online Safety Act, of a bunch of other stuff. And here he is, pushing his nonsense. I don't want to watch his stupid speech because it's just going to make me angry, but he did an event with them. The Heritage Foundation has been doing a bunch of stuff. Like, they love Jonathan Haidt. They put out this other thing that's all Jonathan Haidt slop. That should be the term, is Jonathan Haidt slop. But they put out this other thing. No, don't sell my data. Where I'm just gonna try to find here. Oh yeah, they talk about his fake studies and how they try to make themselves seem like they're against big tech, but surprise, surprise, the Heritage Foundation is not actually against big tech. They want tech-driven authoritarianism. So don't get that twisted in your head. But there's a great piece that came out. Well, so Jonathan Haidt, by the way, published The Anxious Generation. The Anxious Generation, it was a huge book. It basically was a bestseller for months and months and months. Like, this book could not have been more popular. It was lauded by the New York Times, which gave it, no, I'm not signing in. But it was, here, I'll show you guys what the cover looks like. It was lauded by every single mainstream media place. Like, they could not get enough of this book. This is actually a good piece debunking a bunch of this stuff. Nothing in this book is true. This is like, the book is moral panic nonsense. It's basically a remake of a really famous book called The Seduction of the Innocent, which is a book by Frederick Wortham, who was basically just the Jonathan Haidt of his time. And The Seduction of the Innocent was this famous book published back in 1954, where they argued comic books were what was destroying the youth of America. And the book, The Seduction of the Innocent, let me see if we can find it. Literally, it was the same thing as The Anxious Generation, but everything that they were claiming about everything that they claim today about social media, they were already claiming about comic books. So The Seduction of the Innocent is like, oh, it was destroying kids' mental health, and oh, it was destroying kids' brains, and it was also making them gay because Batman and Robin have gay messaging in it. So that's why we need to ban comic books, which they did try to do. So this is just the modern version of that. Now, this man has promoted so much pseudoscience, it's hard to even know where to begin. This is one of many great pieces on Reason. Reason's a libertarian magazine that hates Jonathan Haidt, so shout out to them. But basically, they did a few great takedowns on his bad stuff. So anyway, so there was this great piece in Reclaim the Net, which is a great website that does a lot of good job covering this moral panic stuff. And And basically I just wanted to go through this because this was the piece that I wanted to read. I thought it was really good. You hear a lot of people like Jonathan Haidt has pushed this narrative about social media addiction that's being used, that this moral panic is being used as a pretense for all of these really invasive digital ID laws and identity verification laws, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so I just want to kind of go through this. Also, I know that you guys are like debating selfies. I let me tell you guys, like a lot of the conversation around selfies is deeply misogynistic. If you go read my piece that I pulled up before on the 10th anniversary of the selfie, you'll see that it's primarily the backlash against selfies and this idea of like narcissism is primarily driven towards young women. Selfies are very heavily associated with teenage girls, and so much of the anger and outrage was about women essentially controlling their own image. Selfies allowed women to take photos of themselves, to put themselves in images rather than have other people taking photos of them. And it was this kind of like liberatory thing to be able to control your own image, to take your own image. And a lot of the moral panic and backlash against selfies was ultimately about women taking control of their own image, putting themselves in the images. Women often take photos, for instance, of their families. A lot more women with when the selfies came out would put themselves in the photos. And like so much of the writing and the backlash about selfies and this idea of narcissism and stuff is actually just a reactionary response to women and women sort of putting themselves in images more. So it's really ridiculous, guys. Selfies are not that deep. Like, it's fun to take selfies. Like, people take selfies all the time. It is not some inherent thing that's tied to any there is absolutely no evidence that taking selfies is related to narcissism at all. But again, it's this idea that like how dare you as a woman especially put yourself in the image. And that's what I mean about a lot of this stuff. And if you just go back, like it's all very ridiculous. Now, of course, like it's funny because you don't even need a selfie. Like now the whole thing is to take it on 0.5 or whatever. Like you don't need selfie mode to put yourself in the image, and selfies are seen as kind of like dated. Um, but yeah, I mean, as somebody said, Time Magazine used a female taking a selfie as the cover for their millennial bashing edition. Exactly. So much of this was truly, and so much of this anxious generation stuff is also, it's just about women, right? Like think of why Jonathan Haidt is writing that piece about like liberal women being miserable, you know, because they're on social media, they're addicted to social media. And then he uses this picture of abortion activists on that nonsense post about liberal women. Abortion activists, when abortion is being criminalized. Yes, women are angry and upset, and young liberal women are depressed about losing access to healthcare. But again, he's on stage at the Heritage Foundation pushing reactionary slop. So I just don't want you guys to fall victim to these narratives. They're really nonsense and they're really bigoted. And, uh, it's just like you can think selfies are cringe. They are cringe. Like but like just understand like why okay why are these tropes here, and why are like selfies were also, I mean, there was also like an effort to use selfies as a pretense for regulating the internet, and this idea that like the internet is making people narcissistic and da da da. Like maybe in certain senses, like the internet does certainly make us think of ourselves as like characters, and it has effects on sort of our perception of our own identity, but so do a lot of things. And selfies are not a reason to like, we don't want to use selfies. We don't want to villainize people that take selfies. Okay. It's really not that deep. So I want to just go through this article, which I thought was really good. It's called The Gospel of the Anxious Generation. It just does a good job of talking about social media addiction. And I know you guys get mad at me because every time I try to tell you guys social media addiction is not a thing, people get very mad. I'm not saying that you can't have bad habits around social media. I'm not saying that you can use social media in an unhealthy way. You can. But that is not the same thing as a chemical. That is not the same thing as an addiction. There is no such thing as media addiction. It's like getting addicted to listening to songs. I guess Spotify, sure, Spotify is giving you very good music, song after song, and you just can't stop listening to it. I mean, they literally did make these arguments about like rock music in the 50s or rap music, and then or jazz music, right? That was addicting, and young people can't stop listening to it. Okay, guys, media is not this idea of media addiction is just ridiculous. But that's not to say that you can't have bad habits around using social media. But I want to debunk this. It's so important to not give credence to these narratives about addiction and comparing social media to addiction, because any comparison between sort of, first of all, it's not accurate, but also when you call social media, which is basically the internet, and you call the internet, you criminalize the internet the way that you criminalize illicit substances, you're trying to criminalize a gateway and acts a communication and information gathering platform the way that you would criminalize and regulate illicit substances. So we don't want that. We don't want to, you know, criminalize and regulate the internet the same way that we regulate, illicit substances, because that means that we're regulating access to information, which is what the internet is. It's access to information as, the same as like drugs and alcohol. So it's very frustrating. And oh my gosh, somebody said, as a recovering heroin addict, I take great issue with people pretending addiction for social media is real. Exactly. I mean, it's just like there are when you are addicted to something, you have withdrawal symptoms. It's very hard. It is a physiological thing. Like it is not the same thing as like, oh, I watched too many Instagram reels today. Oh, it's not even the same. But they do. I mean, again, all these arguments were made about comic books. These arguments are made about music, etc. So let's just go through this article really quickly. The myth of social media addiction has become a convenient moral shield for expanding digital ID systems, turning concern for kids' safety into consent for mass surveillance. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment kids and phones stopped being a parental gripe and started sounding like a public health emergency. But if you trace the lineage of the panic, you land on a familiar face, Jonathan Haidt, the respectable father figure of the screen time apocalypse. Jonathan Haidt didn't invent the idea that social media was melting teenage brains. He just made it sound like science. The anxious generation took a half-formed cultural suspicion, phones bad, kids sad, and gave it a bar graph and bibliography. Before the book, The Anxious Generation is what he's talking about, social media addiction was the kind of thing you heard on morning shows, in lawsuits filed by opportunistic attorneys, or the worried sighs of parents trying to confiscate an iPhone. But after the book, it started to sound like definitive, like gravity, that transformation matters. Haidt's pitch was simple enough to fit on a bumper sticker. Smartphones plus social media rewired childhood and caused a mental health crisis. The argument ran on emotional fuel, addiction, loss of control, kids as collateral damage in a digital arms race. He described platforms as if they were running a lab experiment on adolescents. Even when he stopped short of saying children were chemically dependent, the imagery did the work for him. Kids were described as hooked, trapped, compelled. The appeal was obvious. It gave parents and policymakers a villain that you could hold in your hand. The messy, complicated mix of parenting, culture, and economics collapsed into one easy story. Silicon Valley pushed digital heroin on our children, which, by the way, they love that phrase, digital heroin or digital fentanyl. You'll see that a lot in this stuff. And I think this line is really good, where it's like, in reality, kids, like, growing up, raising a child is hard, and like being a child is also really difficult, and being an adolescent, going through adolescence is challenging. It is this complicated mix of parenting, culture, economics, all of these factors, like culture, like so many factors going into, whether you have a happy childhood. So many factors go into that. But never mind the fact that, by the way, even back in 2022, COVID had already killed multiple hundreds of kids' primary caregiver, aka multiple hundreds of thousands of children back in 2022. It's only gotten worse since then, had lost a primary caregiver, aka usually their parent, to COVID. That was back in 2022. It's only accelerated. Losing your parent is so much more significant on your like mental health outcomes than spending too much time on Instagram reels like in 8th grade. It is not even comparable. So, but there's no effort to address that, right? Or like the fact that more kids today are growing up in households where both parents have to work. That has a major effect on your childhood, on your mental health, on all this stuff. Like because of our economy. Our economy no longer supports single family households. But there's no effort to address any of that. Instead, it's this compelling nonsense slop about digital heroin and, Silicon Valley is pushing digital heroin. It's absolutely absurd. So Here it continues. Once you buy that framing, the policy prescriptions practically write themselves. If it's an addiction, you need enforcement, not education. You need bans, monitoring. The debate gave way to it. Some of this sounds AI written, but I don't care. It's making good points. The debate gave way to a crusade. Then the book got its miracle. Bill Gates liked it and openly promoted it. That wasn't a miracle, by the way. Bill Gates is part of like a lot of this shit, okay? Like he's a billionaire, pedophile like the rest of them. Unfortunately, when Microsoft founder and digital ID proponent Gates called the book important, it moved consensus as well as copies. This endorsement flipped the switch. I don't think it was just that endorsement. I actually think it was a lot of other stuff. Like Jonathan Haidt is, again, connected to all these really bad reactionary organizations that actually have they're self-interested in promoting the reactionary policy agenda that he espouses. That endorsement flipped the switch. The anxious generation stopped being a provocative hypothesis and started functioning as gospel. The narrative hardened overnight. The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, the biggest public activist behind British ID systems, began using the book's ideas in its own policy papers about online safety and child protection. That's what's so scary. You can see, and same thing with his ideas and COSA. Yeah, that not X, but AI is very, I think some of this is AI written, but it is whatever. They're making good points. I do like this. I wish the journalist didn't use AI to help write his stuff. That would make me trust it more. But the points he's making are correct. Basically, that the content from Haidt's book very quickly made it into policy proposals. The Institute's analysts picked up Haidt's language about smartphone-driven mental health decline and used it to frame arguments for stronger regulation and digital oversights. The ideas fit neatly within the broader agenda of the Institute, which includes digital ID systems. This is just more like British stuff, no offense, not that I don't care about it. And then we have the whole list of solutions that conveniently call for surveillance and online control. That's ultimately what he's promoting, is mass surveillance and online control, aka censorship. A courtroom in Los Angeles opened last week to that familiar story. Parents, students, and school districts accusing social media companies of deliberately building platforms that harm children. This is the lawsuit that I covered on my main channel. If you listened to my Free Speech Friday episode with Liz Nolan Brown from last week, this is the lawsuit that we cover. This is the lawsuit that we break down and talk about why this is so dangerous and like and by the way, the comments are like so brain poisoned on that video. So please go leave a good comment on that video because people are brain rotted and were so mad at me for saying that like, oh, don't buy into the social media addiction framework, but this is exactly why we don't want to. So basically all of these, parents groups and stuff. And by the way, these parents groups, as we'll get into later in this stream, are affiliated with really right-wing groups. But they're saying that basically these platforms deliberately harm children, which they deliberately exploit children, but they're not like harming them in this way. Meta, Snap, and YouTube were all named. TikTok and Snap quietly settled before the proceedings, but Meta and YouTube stayed in. Lawyers are calling it the new tobacco fight for the digital age. The comparison is dramatic and it plays well in headlines, but new research suggests the story the public keeps hearing, the one about social media addiction, is misleading. A study published in Nature's Scientific Reports surveyed a nationally representative group of Instagram users. Only 2% showed clinical signs that they might place them at risk for addiction. They're not even addicted. They're just like at risk for potential addiction if addiction was to exist. Like, it's so crazy. Yet 18% of people said that they were addicted. That's what's so ridiculous. Self-labeling of clinical conditions, e.g., I think I'm depressed, has proven associated with maladaptive responses. In short, calling yourself addicted will make you behave as if you are. That's what's so important to note. The framing of addiction actually keeps you hooked. It actually benefits these tech companies. It benefits these tech companies in two ways. Not only does framing social media as an addiction keep you hooked on social media, it gives you less control to moderate your own usage. But it also helps the tech companies because if you regulate addiction, you're going to regulate big tech like, these illicit substances with mass surveillance. You're not going to target big tech business models. If you're saying tech is addicting, you're not going to pursue antitrust litigation, privacy litigation, stuff like that. Instead, you're going to regulate the content. You're going to push for mass surveillance, which conveniently allows them to collect more data. So these people that are like, oh my God, you're supporting the tech industry by claiming social media addiction isn't real. No, you ignorant people. You are supporting the tech industry. Like, trust me, I know this. I've covered this for 15 years. Like, don't even start with me, okay? Like, I know more about this than not to be whatever than like 99% of people because it's my job to report on it. But like, again, I'm not saying that you don't have bad habits. Like, I had Ian Anderson, who's a researcher who studies habits, on my channel also a few weeks back that people were so mad at me about. But like, people have very bad habits, but the way that you change a habit and the way that you treat an addiction are radically different. And it's actually harder to change a habit if you treat it as an addiction. So you can have very bad habits with your phone, just the way that you can have really bad habits around a lot of things. You can have bad habits and, be listening to podcasts all day and not get your work done. That's a bad habit or whatever, but but when you treat this as an addiction, it helps the tech companies because you're more powerless and because it lets them regulate. It buys into this regulatory framework that doesn't target their business model, but actually helps their business model. So please recognize that. Stop spreading the social media addiction BS all over the internet. You are literally doing the tech company's work and you're manufacturing consent for mass surveillance. Okay. So the same researchers tested how official language shapes perception. Some participants read the US General Surgeon warnings about addictive social media before reflecting on their own use. Others did not. Even a brief exposure to the addiction framing reduced people's sense of control. They blamed themselves more and they remembered more failed attempts to limit use. Guys, please, if you do one thing, just go like yell at people online that push this stuff. These people that claim social media is addicting and then claim that they're somehow against big tech. You are doing the work of big tech. Read that again. Even brief exposure to the addiction framing reduced people's control. They blamed themselves more and they had a harder time quitting. So just please. The addiction label does not empower users to regain control over their use. Instead, it hinders users by reducing feelings of control, increasing self-blame, and making the experience slightly less positive. So when you guys say you get all these like negative feelings from social media, part of that is how you're thinking of it. Part of that is how you're thinking of it. As somebody in the chat said too, made such a good point. If treating social media as an addiction harmed the business model of big tech, they would be spending millions promoting the evidence that it's not an addiction. They're not. Exactly. They're not. Because if it's treated as an addiction, they can roll out mass surveillance and harvest more data. So it's just so important to give people power and empower them. Say, guys, this is about, guys, these products, yes, they're built to keep you engaged. Yes, you can use them in like unproductive ways. Yes, you can develop bad habits around all this stuff. I'm not arguing any of that, but stop buying into this ridiculous framing. Somebody said from a child development perspective, it's important to teach parents how to have difficult conversations like seeing content from Gaza rather than taking social media away from them. Exactly. That's exactly right. We need to teach kids how to operate in the tech and media landscape of our time. So, most heavy social media use fits the pattern of habit. Oh my God, saying it for me. Habits are behaviors triggered by cues. I don't want to go through all this, but basically this whole study, by the way, I had one of the researchers that actually published this study on my channel. So please go back and listen to that. It's on my channel. Oh yeah. It's so funny. They say no one called TV an addiction. They actually did. And they tried to regulate TV that way too. But here's the key thing, right? In previous decades, people came home from work, dropped their bags, turned on the television. It stayed on through dinner, the evening news, sitcoms, late night TV. 4 hours later, they went to bed. No one called it an addiction. That's actually completely untrue. People absolutely called it an addiction. And not only did people call it an addiction, but they tried to regulate it. Hold on. Let me pull it up. Hold on. There's a great website called the Pessimist Archive, and it's all about moral panics. And I just want you guys to see like how ridiculous it was, the panic over television. Let's look at some of these headlines. Let's look at some of these. Oh yeah. They thought like too much television and not enough sleep is becoming a schoolroom problem. And they accuse kids of telesnoozing when kids watch too much TV and they fall asleep in class. Um, brain is waiting for video deepies. Oh, they're trying to develop three-dimensional TV. Basically, they were like, yeah, they were really scared of like 3D TV, which never thinks. Okay, here we go. Children's addiction to TV presents serious problems. Children's addiction to TV has become an alarming problem. Let me move my thing forward. Basically, it goes on and on. In recent years, TV has come to absorb a major portion of children's leisure time. It takes up as much time as all their other leisure time activities put together. The way children use leisure time sets up certain patterns that last throughout life. TV has a particularly strong impact on children because it is audio-visual, approaching a child through two senses, sight and hearing. Once one 7-year-old, oops, one 7-year-old boy put this well when he said, I like TV because TV gives you stories like a book. It gives you pictures like the movies. It has voices like the radio. This is so funny because they were like really stressed out that television, because like books were really popular, that it was like, oh my God, they're getting multiple senses at one. They should just be reading stories or listening to them on the radio. They shouldn't be getting both. Television, which is so funny because when you think of the way that like people are like social media is this total new thing. Social media is rewiring people's brains. Let's not forget that like literally 50 years ago, they were claiming that like television would rewire children's brains because they got audio and visual inputs at the same time. And that was like insane. Um, this is also a thing. TV can provide contact with the adult world from which the child is often excluded. The TV screen is much more democratic than parents. It takes your children into its confidence, although this is not always a virtual. Basically, it's exposing kids to adult ideas. And then they say a child gets aesthetic pleasure from television and learns new aesthetic values, which it's, again, this is so funny. It's like, this is what they're saying about television. And then they talk about like dosage. Again, comparing it to drugs. And this is just like one article. There was so much of this. Oh yeah, that's right. They tried to I forgot about this case. I made a video about this. This is in my Jonathan Haidt video on my main channel, but youth found guilty of murder in television addiction. So basically this 15-year-old was claiming television, like basically he murdered someone and then they blamed his television addiction because he was watching too much TV and like TV was basically brainwashing people. I feel the boy is sick. He needs help. Like, guys, television doesn't make you murder people, but of course they were claiming so much nonsense back in the day. Let me see, how do I get back to the, oh my God. Oh no, what did I do here? Let me just get back to the TV clippings. Okay, another one. TV addiction. TV and drug addiction is similar. A child psychiatrist, it's always a psychiatrist, by the way. These people don't even study this stuff. Should prevent their children's addiction to television by oh yeah, that's right. They wanted parents to like hide TVs in closets because that would like help kids break their addiction. Trying to break a child's TV habit is like dealing with people coming off drugs. This is like the constant thing that you hear them claim. TV stupor is the first symptom of disease. Anyway, like you can just see how many of these news articles, you know, talked about television addiction. This website, the Pessimist Archive, is really great. I just think people. Oh yeah, this is like more of the DVs. But I just think people need to remember that that all of this stuff is what's old is new, and moral panics. We see the same arguments made about every moral panic. So anyway, when they say no one called an addiction, please do some research. Like that was not true. But this is true. No one demanded that viewers show a digital ID to watch, mostly because they didn't have the technology yet. No one proposed tracking their screen time by minute analytics. They did actually, but they didn't have the technology to do that yet. There were no algorithms measuring which jokes made them laugh or commercials held attention. This is all just talking about like big data. Like, yeah, now you can harvest a lot more big data. Um, some of this stuff sounds really AI generated. The nightly ritual was habitual, not pathological. It filled the same human need for distraction. I mean, blah blah blah. I kind of don't. Oh, we're at the end. Anyway, basically, I think this is the most important point. Each new wave of moral panic creates openings for regulators, tech companies, and security contractors to justify watching everyone more closely in the name of well being. The pattern is familiar. When a problem is described as uncontrollable, control becomes the product. I just think like this is the point. It's all meant to justify mass surveillance. And that's what we need to remember. We need to remember because we see this over and over again. And we don't want digital ID systems. We don't want everything that we consume tracked by the government, tracked by AI. We don't want that. And that's the world that we're moving to when we buy into these moral panics. And when you push the false idea of social media addiction, that is what you're pushing. That is the nonsense that you are, pushing. Christina Moss, I think he used AI to write this article, but that's okay. Jonathan Haidt used AI. The cover of his book is AI generated. That's an interesting little tidbit. Jonathan Haidt, for all the moral panic stuff that he pushes, the cover of his book is an AI generated. It's AI generated background. So I think that that's funny. So yeah, do you guys have any questions about this before we move on? I don't know. I know it like every time I try to talk about social media addiction and how it's like a fake like moral panic nonsense thing, people get so mad in the comments of my videos and they start like going ballistic on me and they like unsubscribe from my Patreon and I like when I published that Jonathan Haidt video initially, I lost like I want to say this was back I published it a year ago, so I didn't have that many I only had like a couple hundred like Patreon or whatever, like paying subscribers at the time. I wasn't on Patreon, I was on Substack only, but like I lost almost half of them because people were so angry at me because I dared to say like, hey, the social media addiction stuff is actually just a convenient moral panic to push mass surveillance. They were like, how dare you? You're defending big tech. Da, da, da. I'm like, I'm defending big tech. I've been a tech reporter for 15 years. No, I cover big tech. Like, hello, have you followed like an ounce of my work over 15 years that I've worked as a tech reporter? Like, by the way, covering this stuff, like, what are you talking about? But they get so mad. And I just think also like, it's just so important again, to remember who this man is affiliated with. Okay, guys, it is the Heritage Foundation. That's what we're boosting here. So yeah, was anybody, Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth with new ideas. Exactly. All this stuff is a tale as old as time. Why do they target removing media access to children first? Well, because think of the children as compelling, and children are an oppressed group in society. I mean, this is not something that people really talk about a lot, but children are oppressed in the sense that like they do not have the same legal protections that adults have. Like children are they suffer a lot of that, the sort of broader systemic oppression. They're doing VPN blocks on some videos on YouTube. Yeah, we're gonna get into VPN blocks later. What's my moral panic addiction? I know you could argue. All I do is cover moral panics. I think it would behoove you to collect sources arguing your point most sophisticatedly. First of all, were you not here for the entire first portion when we went through literally all of the sources? Were you not here when we went through all of this very detailed, very, very well done dismantling of the academic research that this entire moral panic is predicated on? If not, please go back and watch that. Anyway. But yeah, it is really bad. So yeah, that basically don't listen to Jonathan Haidt. Do not push this social media addiction BS. If you see people pushing it online, fight back against it. Try to explain to them that they are pushing a dangerous moral panic that's being used to manufacture mass surveillance and reward big tech. And that like this addiction framework actually makes it harder for people to quit social media, not easier. So please just try to explain that to people because I try to explain it every day and people get so mad. If you can go in the comments of those videos and fight the good fight, good for you. But I feel like this stuff just keeps coming up online and it's really hard to fight.